What if the dusty, frozen wasteland we call Mars is actually a corpse, the dead body of a world that once looked almost exactly like Earth, complete with oceans, rivers, beaches, and possibly even life? That is not science fiction. That is the question keeping planetary scientists awake at night. And the evidence piling up over the last few years is more disturbing and more thrilling than anything Hollywood has ever imagined. Mars is a small, rocky world roughly half the diameter of Earth, measuring about 4,212 miles across. Its gravity pulls at only 38% of what we feel on the surface of our own planet, meaning a person who weighs 180 pounds in New York City would feel as though they weighed barely 68 pounds standing on Martian soil. The atmosphere is almost non-existent by Earth standards. Average surface pressure hovers around 0.6% of sea level pressure in the United States, which is roughly equivalent to standing at an altitude of over 100,000 feet above Earth, far higher than any commercial aircraft could ever fly. The air itself is 95% carbon dioxide, with only trace amounts of nitrogen and argon, and virtually zero oxygen. Average temperature sits at around minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and while the equator can occasionally nudge above freezing during a summer afternoon, nighttime temperatures at the poles plummet below minus 190 degrees Fahrenheit. Without a pressurized suit, a human being exposed to the Martian surface would lose consciousness within about 15 seconds and die within minutes from asphyxiation, hypothermia, and the near-vacuum boiling of body fluids. By every measure of modern habitability, Mars is lethal. And yet the evidence keeps whispering that this was not always the case. One of the first things any visitor would notice is the color of the sky. On Earth, nitrogen and oxygen molecules scatter shorter wavelengths of sunlight, painting our sky a familiar blue. On Mars, the mechanism works in reverse. Fine iron oxide dust particles, essentially rust, are perpetually suspended in the thin atmosphere, and these particles scatter longer wavelengths of light, bathing the Martian sky in hues that range from butterscotch to a deep, burnt orange. During the planet-encircling dust storms that erupt every few Martian years, the sky can darken to a thick, suffocating ochre that blots out the sun for weeks at a time. The global dust storm of 2018 was so severe that it killed NASA's Opportunity rover after 15 years of operation by smothering its solar panels and starving it of electrical power. Imagine standing beneath a sky the color of a perpetual, apocalyptic sunset, knowing that the beauty overhead is actually a storm of microscopic iron rust particles that could disable your equipment and coat every surface in a fine, toxic film. That is daily life on Mars. But the real story of Mars is not what it is today. The real story is what it used to be. And the single most important clue to that past is the planet's missing magnetic field. Earth's interior works like a gigantic dynamo. Convection currents in the liquid iron outer core generate a powerful global magnetic field that envelopes the planet in an invisible shield called the magnetosphere. This shield deflects the constant stream of charged particles pouring off the sun, known as the solar wind, and prevents those particles from stripping away our atmosphere molecule by molecule. Mars once had an identical system. Orbital surveys by NASA's Mars Global Surveyor detected patches of intensely magnetized ancient crust in the southern highlands, some of the strongest crustal magnetic anomalies measured anywhere in the solar system. These remnants are the fossilized fingerprints of a global dynamo that was active when Mars was young. According to research published by teams at Harvard and MIT using advanced quantum diamond microscopy on Martian meteorites, the dynamo was operating as recently as 3.7 billion years ago and possibly persisted 200 million years longer than earlier estimates suggested. But Mars is significantly smaller than Earth. Its interior cooled faster, the convective engine in the core stalled, and the global magnetic field flickered out. Once that happened, the planet was defenseless. NASA's MAVEN orbiter, which has been studying Mars's upper atmosphere since 2014, has measured the ongoing escape of atmospheric gases at a rate of roughly 1 to 2 kilograms per second. That sounds modest until you multiply it across billions of years. The data show that escape rates spike tenfold when Mars passes closest to the Sun and when solar storm events hammer the unshielded atmosphere. Over 3.5 billion years of relentless bombardment. The solar wind has sandblasted almost the entire Martian atmosphere into space. The thick, warm blanket of gas that once kept rivers flowing and oceans liquid was literally blown away, particle by particle, into the void. The loss of the magnetic field was not just a geological event. It was a death sentence for the planet's climate, its water cycle, and very possibly its biology. Before that death sentence was carried out, however, Mars was a world that would have looked astonishingly familiar to anyone standing on the coast of an ancient Earth. The evidence for a wet Martian past has been building for decades, but the last several years have transformed that evidence from suggestive to overwhelming. Orbital imagery reveals features that are unmistakably the signatures of flowing water. Sinuous channels with oxbow meanders that could only have been carved by rivers running steadily for thousands or millions of years. Not by brief, catastrophic floods. Deltas, the fan-shaped deposits of sediment left where a river meets a standing body of water, have been identified at multiple locations. There are terraced valley systems, streamlined islands, and layered sedimentary formations that closely mirror geological features found in the American Southwest, the Nile Delta, and the lake basins of East Africa. Perhaps the most dramatic claim concerns the northern lowlands. A long-standing hypothesis holds that a vast ocean, sometimes called Oceanus Borealis, once filled the low-lying plains of Mars's northern hemisphere. In February 2025, a team of Chinese researchers published a landmark paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences detailing data from the Zhurong rover, which operated on the surface of Utopia Planitia from May 2021 to May 2022. Zhurong's ground-penetrating radar detected subsurface sedimentary structures that closely resemble shallow sandy beach slopes, the kind of gently graded deposits that form where waves lap against a shoreline. The researchers concluded that these structures represent the preserved coastal deposits of an ancient body of water they called the Deuteronomus Ocean, which existed roughly 3.5 to 4 billion years ago. If confirmed, this means Mars once had a northern ocean potentially comparable in area to the combined surface of the Atlantic and Arctic Oceans, with beaches, wave action, tidal sediment sorting, and all the dynamic coastal geology that implies. The image of Mars as a blue and red marble with a glittering ocean in its northern hemisphere is no longer mere speculation. It is becoming the mainstream scientific reconstruction. On the ground, NASA's rovers have added extraordinary detail to this picture. The Curiosity rover, which landed in Gale Crater in August 2012 and remains operational after more than 13 years on the Martian surface, has systematically documented a place that was once a habitable lake. Analysis of sedimentary rock layers at the base of Mount Sharp, the 18,000-foot mound of layered sediment at the center of the crater, revealed that roughly 3 billion years ago, Gale Crater held a lake fed by streams. The water was neither too acidic nor too alkaline, and it contained the key chemical ingredients for life as we know it: carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. The lake persisted long enough for thick sequences of mudstone to accumulate, suggesting it was not a brief, transient puddle, but a stable body of water that may have endured for millions of years. Curiosity also detected complex organic molecules in those ancient mudstones, including thiophenes, benzene, toluene, and small carbon chains, compounds that on Earth are often associated with biology, though they can also form through non-biological geochemistry. In 2018, the Curiosity science team published these findings in the journal Science, and NASA's then Associate Administrator Thomas Zurbuchen called the results the most compelling evidence yet that Mars was once capable of supporting life. The Perseverance rover, which landed in Jezero Crater in February 2021, has taken the investigation even further. Jezero was chosen specifically because orbital imagery showed a beautifully preserved river delta, where an ancient river once flowed into a crater lake. Perseverance confirmed the delta's structure in stunning detail, documenting sedimentary layers that transition from fine-grained lake-bottom muds to coarser flood deposits carrying boulders that could only have been transported by powerful water flows. The geological narrative written in those rocks tells of a crater lake that existed quietly for extended periods, accumulating organic-rich sediments. and was then periodically disrupted by massive flooding events that sent debris cascading down the delta face. It is a record of a dynamic, evolving hydrological system, the kind of environment where life on Earth thrives. But Perseverance's most electrifying discovery came in July 2024 when the rover examined a rock, partially buried in the dry bed of an ancient river channel called Neretva Vallis. The rock, nicknamed Chiava Falls, was part of a geological formation called Bright Angel, and it was unlike anything the mission had encountered. The rock was a fine-grained mudstone, the kind of sediment that is exceptionally good at trapping and preserving whatever organic material settles into it. Perseverance's Sherlock instrument, a specialized ultraviolet Raman spectrometer designed to map organic compounds, detected complex macromolecular carbon signatures within the rock. But what truly stunned the science team were two types of microscopic features embedded in the mudstone. The first were tiny nodules about 100 to 200 microns in diameter that the team called poppy seeds, composed of an iron phosphate mineral called vivianite. The second were larger millimeter-scale spots with dark rims and bleached white interiors that the team called leopard spots. The rims of the leopard spots were also vivianite, but their cores contained gragite, an iron sulfide mineral. Together, these features told a story of redox chemistry. Organic matter in the ancient mud had chemically reacted with the surrounding iron-rich sediment, reducing oxidized iron to create vivianite, and then sulfate in the pore water had been reduced to form gragite. On Earth, this precise sequence of iron reduction followed by sulfate reduction is overwhelmingly driven by living microorganisms. Bacteria that breathe iron and bacteria that breathe sulfate are among the most ancient forms of life on our planet, and the mineral byproducts they leave behind look remarkably similar to what Perseverance found inside Chiava Falls. In September 2025, the Perseverance science team published a peer-reviewed paper in the journal Nature reporting that they had found no strong evidence for any purely non-biological mechanism that could explain the full suite of observations. Lead author Joel Hurwitz of Stony Brook University, New York, was careful to emphasize that this does not prove the existence of Martian life. The team placed the finding at roughly step 3.5 on NASA's Confidence of Life Detection Scale, a 7-step framework for evaluating potential biosignatures. Step 4 requires ruling out all known abiotic explanations, and the team acknowledged that laboratory experiments simulating Martian conditions might eventually produce the same mineral assemblages without biology. But as Hurwitz pointed out, no one has yet demonstrated that the sulfate-to-sulfide reduction observed in the leopard spots can occur at low temperatures without microbial involvement. On Earth, that reaction requires either biology or temperatures above roughly 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and there is no evidence that the Bright Angel rocks were ever heated to such temperatures. The sample collected from Chiava Falls, sealed inside a titanium tube designated Sapphire Canyon, is now sitting on the Martian surface, waiting for a future retrieval mission. If that sample ever reaches an Earth laboratory, isotopic analysis of the iron, sulfur, and carbon within those tiny mineral nodules could potentially provide the definitive answer to whether Mars once harbored living organisms. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most important rock samples in the history of science. The question of present-day water on Mars adds another layer of intrigue. While the surface is far too cold and the atmospheric pressure far too low for liquid water to persist in the open, Mars still holds enormous quantities of water in other forms. The polar ice caps contain a mixture of water ice and frozen carbon dioxide, with the water ice component alone estimated to be comparable in volume to the Greenland ice sheet. At middle and high latitudes, subsurface ice deposits have been confirmed by orbital radar and by direct observation where crater impacts and erosion have exposed clean ice just a few feet below the surface. But the most startling discovery came in August 2024, when a team led by Vashon Wright at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and Michael Monga at the University of California, Berkeley, published an analysis of seismic data collected by NASA's InSight lander before its mission ended in 2022. By applying the same rock physics models used to map underground aquifers and oil fields on Earth, They concluded that the best explanation for InSight's seismic observations is a deep layer of fractured igneous rock saturated with liquid water, located between roughly 7 and 13 miles below the Martian surface. The estimated volume of water in this mid-crustal reservoir is staggering, enough to cover the entire planet to a depth of 1 to 2 kilometers, which is more than the volume proposed for Mars's hypothesized ancient oceans. This water is trapped in tiny cracks and pore spaces in the rock, and it is far too deep for any current or foreseeable drilling technology to access. But its existence has profound implications. It suggests that much of Mars's ancient surface water did not escape to space, as previously assumed, but instead percolated downward into the crust over billions of years. And if liquid water exists at depth, then so does the theoretical possibility of microbial life clinging on in that deep, dark, pressurized environment. On Earth, microorganisms have been found thriving in rock fractures miles below the surface, sustained by chemical energy from water-rock reactions rather than sunlight. There is no known reason why similar organisms could not survive in the Martian mid-crust, provided the water is real and the chemistry is right. Then there is the methane mystery, a puzzle that has tormented Mars scientists for over 2 decades. Methane is a simple molecule, one carbon atom bonded to 4 hydrogen atoms. But on Mars it carries outsized significance because on Earth, the overwhelming majority of atmospheric methane is produced by living organisms, cattle, wetland microbes, termites, and the vast communities of methane-generating archaea that inhabit every anoxic environment from swamps to deep-sea sediments. In the early 2000s, ground-based telescopes and the European Space Agency's Mars Express orbiter detected traces of methane in the Martian atmosphere, a finding that was initially met with skepticism because methane should be destroyed by ultraviolet radiation on Mars within a few hundred years. If methane is present, something must be actively replenishing it. Curiosity confirmed the detection at Gale Crater and added a bewildering twist. Methane levels appear to follow a seasonal cycle, rising in the warm Martian summer and falling in winter, with occasional dramatic spikes. In June 2019, Curiosity recorded a methane concentration of roughly 21 parts per billion by volume, the highest single measurement ever taken on Mars, only for the reading to plummet back to baseline within days. The seasonal pattern suggests a process linked to temperature, perhaps the warming and cooling of subsurface ice releasing trapped gas, or perhaps the metabolic activity of underground organisms that become more active when conditions warm. But when the European Space Agency's Trace Gas Orbiter, which entered Mars orbit in 2016 specifically to study atmospheric methane with instruments far more sensitive than Curiosity's, looked for the gas from above, it found essentially nothing. The contradiction between surface-level detections and orbital non-detections remains unresolved. One hypothesis is that methane is released locally and then rapidly destroyed or absorbed by the soil before it can mix into the global atmosphere. Another is that the gas is concentrated near the surface at night and dispersed during the day in ways that orbital instruments cannot capture. Whatever the explanation, the methane signal refuses to go away and refuses to be easily explained. It is a restless ghost haunting the edges of Mars science, stubbornly refusing to confirm or deny the presence of something alive beneath the surface. The story of ALH 84001 deserves mention not because it provided the answer, but because it shaped the question in ways that still reverberate. ALH 84001 is a 4.1 billion-year-old fragment of Martian crust that was blasted off the planet by an asteroid impact, drifted through space for millions of years, and fell to Earth in Antarctica roughly 13,000 years ago, where it was recovered by a meteorite hunting expedition in 1984 near the Allen Hills ice field. In 1996, a NASA team led by David McKay published a paper in Science announcing that the meteorite contained microscopic structures resembling fossilized bacteria, along with organic molecules and mineral grains that could be byproducts of biological activity. President Bill Clinton held a press conference at the White House to discuss the implications. The announcement electrified the world and arguably saved NASA's Mars program from budget cuts by reigniting public interest in the red planet. Over the following years, however, The biological interpretation was steadily eroded by alternative explanations. The tiny elongated structures were far smaller than any known terrestrial cells and could have been mineral artifacts. The organic molecules could have been produced by non-biological chemistry. In January 2022, a team led by Andrew Steele at the Carnegie Institution for Science in Washington, D.C. published a comprehensive reanalysis in Science demonstrating that the organic compounds in ALH 84001 were most likely produced by serpentinization, a well-understood geological process in which water reacts with iron and magnesium-rich igneous rock to produce hydrogen and organic molecules without any biological involvement. NASA's astrobiology program concurred, stating that the evidence supported a geochemical rather than a biological origin for the meteorite's organic content. The ALH 84001 episode is now widely regarded as a cautionary tale about the difficulty of distinguishing biological from non-biological signatures in ancient rocks, a lesson that directly informs how scientists are approaching the Chiava Falls discovery with such extreme caution today. Mars has also been a magnet for claims of artificial structures and lost civilizations, and no discussion of the planet's mysteries would be complete without addressing them head-on. The most famous example is the so-called face on Mars, an image captured by NASA's Viking 1 orbiter in 1976 as it photographed the Cydonia region. In the low-resolution photograph, a mesa roughly a mile across appeared to have eye sockets, a nose, and a mouth, giving it an uncanny resemblance to a human face staring up from the Martian surface. NASA released the image with a note describing it as a huge rock formation which resembles a human head, and scientists immediately attributed the appearance to a trick of light and shadow combined with the limited resolution of the Viking camera. But the public imagination seized on the image with a ferocity that caught everyone off guard. Books, television documentaries, and conspiracy theories proliferated. Writer and researcher Richard C. Hoagland championed the idea that the face was a monument built by an ancient Martian civilization, and he pointed to other nearby formations, including a five-sided mesa he called the DNM Pyramid after its discoverers Vincent Di Pietro and Gregory Molinar, as additional evidence of a ruined alien city. Hoagland's book The Monuments of Mars became a bestseller, and public pressure on NASA to reinvestigate the site was intense. The scientific resolution was definitive and, for believers, anticlimactic. In 1998, NASA's Mars Global Surveyor re-imaged the face with a camera 10 times sharper than Viking's. The result was unambiguous. The face was an ordinary, eroded mesa. The illusion of facial features vanished completely at higher resolution. Further imaging by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and the European Space Agency's Mars Express Orbiter confirmed the finding beyond any doubt. The phenomenon responsible for the illusion is called pareidolia, the deeply wired human tendency to perceive faces and meaningful patterns in random or ambiguous stimuli. It is the same cognitive mechanism that makes us see animals in clouds, religious figures in toast, and conspiratorial patterns in coincidence. Every other allegedly artificial feature in Cydonia has been similarly explained. The DNM Pyramid is an erosion remnant of impact debris. The so-called city blocks are clusters of hills and crater rims whose alignment is random, and the geometric appearance is an artifact of lighting angle and wishful thinking. Carl Sagan discussed the face on Mars in his 1995 book The Demon-Haunted World, using it as a case study in the importance of scientific skepticism and the human vulnerability to self-deception. The debunking of the face did not end the tradition of finding anomalies in Mars photographs. Every few months, someone identifies a rock shadow that looks like a woman, a rodent, a coffin, a spoon, or a doorway, and the image briefly circulates on social media with breathless captions. These are all textbook examples of pareidolia operating on a landscape where billions of rocks of every conceivable shape are being photographed at high resolution from multiple angles. It would be extraordinary if some of them did not occasionally resemble familiar objects. No credible evidence for artificial structures of any kind has ever been found on Mars by any space agency from any nation. The conspiracy theory that NASA is hiding evidence of a Martian civilization collapses under the weight of a simple observation. China, the European Space Agency, India, and the United Arab Emirates all have their own Mars orbiters, and none of them have reported finding anything artificial either. A secret maintained by one agency is difficult. A secret maintained by every space program on Earth, including those belonging to geopolitical rivals, is essentially impossible. But it is important to distinguish between the debunked claims of Mars conspiracy theorists and the legitimately open question of whether Mars ever hosted microbial life. The first is pseudoscience. The second is cutting-edge science being pursued by thousands of researchers across the globe. And the reason the question remains open is not because of insufficient data, but because the data are tantalizingly ambiguous. Every major discovery, from the ancient lake beds to the organic molecules to the seasonal methane to the deep crustal water reservoir, is consistent with a Mars that once had life and might still have life. But each discovery also admits a non-biological explanation. The organic molecules could be from meteorite infall or volcanic outgassing. The methane could come from serpentinization or UV degradation of organic dust. The Chiava Falls minerals could conceivably form through abiotic chemistry under conditions we have not yet replicated in the lab. Science demands that we exhaust every non-biological explanation before claiming the detection of extraterrestrial life, because such a claim would be among the most consequential in human history, and getting it wrong would be devastating for public trust in science. This is why the Mars sample return campaign matters so profoundly, and why its troubled status is a source of genuine anguish in the planetary science community. The original NASA ESA Mars sample return plan envisioned sending a lander and a small rocket to Mars to collect the sample tubes cached by Perseverance, launch them into Mars orbit, rendezvous with an orbiting spacecraft, and ferry them back to Earth. It was the most ambitious robotic mission ever conceived, and it was projected to cost approximately $11 billion, with samples arriving on Earth no earlier than 2040. In 2024, NASA deemed that cost infeasible and paused the program. In January 2025, the agency presented two scaled-down alternatives aimed at reducing cost to around $7 billion. But by that point, the political will to fund the mission had eroded significantly, and the program was effectively dead in its original form. Meanwhile, China announced its own Mars sample return mission, Tianwen-3, targeting a launch around 2028 with sample return potentially beating NASA to the prize. The prospect that Chinese laboratories might be the first to analyze Martian rocks has injected a new urgency into the debate, with some arguing that the United States is in danger of forfeiting its decades-long leadership in Mars exploration. As of mid-2026, the future of Mars sample return remains uncertain, and the Sapphire Canyon tube, containing the Chiava Falls sample, sits on the Martian surface, waiting. The exploration fleet currently operating at Mars is nonetheless impressive. Perseverance continues to traverse Jezero crater, now exploring the crater rim and collecting additional samples. As of late July 2026, the rover has been active for over 930 Martian sols and still has 6 empty sample tubes to fill. Curiosity, the indefatigable elder statesman, has been operating for more than 13 years and continues to climb the sedimentary layers of Mount Sharp, reading the geological history of Mars like pages in a book. In orbit, NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter continues to provide high-resolution imagery and subsurface radar data, while the MAVEN orbiter monitors atmospheric escape. The European Space Agency's Trace Gas Orbiter hunts for methane and other trace gases. The UAE's HOPE orbiter studies Martian weather and atmospheric dynamics. India's Mars orbiter mission, though it completed its primary mission years ago, demonstrated that reaching Mars is no longer the exclusive domain of superpowers. The Ingenuity helicopter, the tiny 4-pound drone that hitched a ride with Perseverance and became the first aircraft to achieve powered flight on another world, completed 72 flights over nearly 3 years before a rotor blade broke during landing in January 2024, ending its mission. In those 72 flights, Ingenuity transformed planetary exploration by demonstrating that aerial reconnaissance is possible even in an atmosphere 99% thinner than Earth's. And future Mars missions will almost certainly include next-generation rotorcraft. Looking ahead, ESA's Rosalind Franklin rover is currently targeting a launch no earlier than late 2028 aboard a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket. This rover carries a drill capable of boring 2 meters below the Martian surface, deeper than any previous Mars mission. The rationale is compelling. The harsh radiation environment on the Martian surface breaks down organic molecules over geological time, meaning that any biosignatures near the surface may have been destroyed. By drilling into the subsurface, Rosalind Franklin could access pristine rock that has been shielded from radiation for billions of years, potentially preserving organic molecules or even microfossils that would be undetectable on the surface. If the mission succeeds, it could provide an entirely new class of evidence for or against Martian life. The grandest dream associated with Mars is terraforming, the idea of transforming the entire planet into a habitable world with breathable air, liquid water on the surface, and temperatures warm enough for humans to walk outside without spacesuits. The concept has a long history in science fiction. From Kim Stanley Robinson's epic Mars trilogy to countless films and video games. And it entered mainstream public discourse when SpaceX founder Elon Musk suggested detonating nuclear weapons over Mars's polar ice caps to release carbon dioxide, thicken the atmosphere, and trigger a runaway greenhouse effect. The idea is audacious, visually dramatic, and almost certainly unworkable. In 2018, NASA-sponsored researchers Bruce Jakosky and Christopher Edwards published a detailed analysis in Nature Astronomy, concluding that Mars simply does not contain enough accessible carbon dioxide to create a meaningful greenhouse effect. Even if every known reservoir of CO2 on Mars, including the polar caps, the regolith, and mineral deposits called carbonates, were completely released into the atmosphere, the resulting pressure would reach only about 7% of Earth's sea level atmosphere. That is nowhere near enough to warm the planet significantly or to allow liquid water to exist on the surface. The study concluded bluntly that terraforming Mars is not possible using present-day technology. The fundamental obstacles go beyond the CO2 shortage. Mars's weak gravity, only 38% of Earth's, imposes a ceiling on how much atmosphere the planet can permanently retain. Calculations suggest Mars could hold a stable atmospheric pressure of at most about 0.38 atmospheres, roughly 1/3 of what we breathe at sea level on Earth. Even if we could magically conjure a thicker atmosphere into existence, it would slowly leak away without a global magnetic field to protect it from solar wind erosion. In 2017, NASA's Jim Green proposed a speculative solution, placing a powerful magnetic dipole shield at the L1 Lagrange point between Mars and the Sun, effectively creating an artificial magnetosphere to shelter the planet. The concept is elegant in theory, but the required field strength far exceeds current engineering capabilities, and maintaining such a shield indefinitely would demand energy infrastructure on a scale that humanity has never attempted. Oxygen is another insurmountable problem on any human timescale. Mars's atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide, and converting that into breathable air would require either enormous industrial capacity or biological intervention on a planetary scale. Perseverance carried an experiment called MOXIE, the Mars Oxygen In Situ Resource Utilization Experiment, which successfully demonstrated that a toaster-sized device could extract small amounts of oxygen from the Martian CO2 atmosphere. But scaling that process up to terraform an entire planet is like trying to fill an Olympic swimming pool with an eyedropper. The biological approach, seeding Mars with photosynthetic organisms like cyanobacteria to gradually oxygenate the atmosphere, faces its own challenges. Mars receives less than half the solar energy that Earth does, and periodic global dust storms would choke photosynthesis for weeks at a time. Even optimistic models suggest that biological oxygenation of Mars would require tens of thousands of years, and those models typically assume a much thicker CO2 atmosphere than Mars can actually provide. There are ethical dimensions to terraforming as well. If Mars harbors even the simplest microbial life in its deep subsurface, deliberately altering the planet's environment to suit human needs could constitute the destruction of an entire alien biosphere, the only other example of life in the universe that we might ever discover. The field of planetary protection, which governs how space agencies prevent biological contamination between worlds, would need to be completely rethought. The cost of terraforming, likely running into the hundreds of trillions of dollars over centuries, raises the question of whether those resources might be better spent preserving and restoring the habitability of the planet we already have. For the foreseeable future, the realistic path to human habitation on Mars does not involve transforming the whole planet, but rather building small, self-contained habitats, pressurized domes, underground shelters carved into lava tubes, and modular structures where internal temperature, pressure, and atmospheric composition can be maintained at Earth-like levels. These would be islands of habitability in an otherwise hostile world, more akin to a submarine or a space station than a colony in any traditional sense. SpaceX has been the most vocal private sector advocate for Mars settlement. The company's Starship vehicle, the largest and most powerful rocket ever built, is designed with Mars missions in mind. As of 2026, SpaceX has deprioritized its Mars timeline somewhat to focus on lunar missions, but the long-term vision remains. The company's website outlines a plan for uncrewed Starship cargo flights to the Martian surface beginning no earlier than 2028, with the first crewed missions potentially following in the early 2030s if the technology matures on schedule. NASA's own human Mars exploration plans target the 2030s to 2040s, though no specific mission has been formally approved or funded. The reality is that sending humans to Mars involves challenges that dwarf anything in the history of human spaceflight. The journey takes 6 to 9 months each way, during which the crew would be exposed to cosmic radiation at levels far beyond what astronauts experience on the International Space Station. Upon arrival, they would face the physiological effects of 38% gravity, including probable bone density loss and muscle atrophy, the psychological stress of living in a confined space millions of miles from home with a communication delay of up to 24 minutes each way, and the operational challenges of maintaining life support systems with no possibility of emergency resupply from Earth. Food would need to be grown hydroponically or in pressurized greenhouses. Water would be recycled relentlessly or extracted from subsurface ice. Every piece of equipment would need to function flawlessly in an environment where a single mechanical failure could be fatal and help is months away. The Martian soil itself poses a health hazard. It contains perchlorate salts, toxic to the human thyroid, and fine dust particles that could damage lungs if inhaled repeatedly. Dust management inside habitats would be a daily survival concern. Despite all of this, there is a powerful argument for going. Establishing a human presence on Mars would be the greatest exploratory achievement in human history, surpassing even the Apollo moon landings in scope and ambition. The Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina lasted 12 seconds and covered 120 feet. Within 66 years, humans were walking on the moon. The arc of human exploration has always bent toward the seemingly impossible, and Mars is the next horizon. What makes Mars so compelling as a destination, beyond the raw adventure of it, is what the planet tells us about ourselves and our future. Mars is a cautionary tale written in rock and ice across an entire world. Here was a planet that had nearly everything Earth had: a magnetic field, a thick atmosphere, liquid water, volcanic activity, and quite possibly the chemical building blocks of life. And then, over the course of a few 100 million years, it lost its magnetic shield. Its atmosphere was stripped away, its oceans froze and then sublimated or percolated underground, and it became the cold, desiccated husk we see today. The chain of events that killed Mars, core cooling leading to magnetic field collapse leading to atmospheric loss leading to surface water disappearance, is a sequence that could, in the very distant future, happen to Earth as well. Our planet's core will eventually cool. Our magnetic field will eventually weaken. The sun will eventually expand and increase the rate of atmospheric escape. On timescales of billions of years, Earth's fate may not be so different from Mars's. Studying how and why Mars died is not merely an academic exercise. It is a way of understanding the life expectancy of habitable worlds, including our own. There is also the reverse lesson: the difficulty of terraforming Mars, the sheer impossibility of recreating what nature provided for free on Earth, should make us appreciate the extraordinary luck of living on a planet with a strong magnetic field, a thick ozone layer, abundant liquid water, a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, and a biological carbon cycle that has maintained habitable conditions for nearly 4 billion years. Every estimate of what it would cost to make Mars even marginally livable runs into figures that make the entire GDP of the United States look like pocket change. Yet we already live on a perfectly terraformed world, and we are degrading it through climate change, deforestation, ocean acidification, and biodiversity loss at a rate that would have been unimaginable a century ago. If Mars teaches us anything, it is that planetary habitability is precious, fragile, and once lost, essentially impossible to restore. The landscape of Mars itself seems almost designed to provoke awe and humility. Olympus Mons, the tallest volcano in the solar system, rises approximately 72,000 feet above the surrounding plains, roughly 2.5 times the height of Mount Everest above sea level. Its base is 374 miles across, roughly the distance from New York City to Richmond, Virginia. If you stood at the foot of Olympus Mons and looked up, you would not see a towering peak. The slope is so gentle, around 5 degrees, that the volcano's summit would be beyond the curve of the horizon. The mountain is so large that it essentially is the horizon. Valles Marineris, the Great Canyon system that slashes across the Martian equator, stretches more than 500 miles from end to end, long enough to span the entire continental United States from New York to Los Angeles. In places it is 120 miles wide and nearly 23,000 feet deep. The Grand Canyon, the largest canyon in the United States and one of the most awe-inspiring geological features on Earth, would fit inside a single-side tributary of Valles Marineris and barely be noticed. The canyon system is thought to have formed as the Martian crust was stretched and cracked by the enormous volcanic upwelling of the Tharsis Bulge, a region of volcanic highlands that includes Olympus Mons. The scale of these features is a reminder that Mars, despite being half the size of Earth, was once a geologically hyperactive world, and the scars of that activity are preserved with a clarity that Earth's constant weathering, plate tectonics, and biological erosion have largely erased from our own planet's surface. As we stand in mid-2026, the state of Mars exploration can be summarized as follows. We know with high confidence that Mars once had a thick atmosphere, a global magnetic field, extensive surface water including rivers, lakes, deltas, and very likely a northern ocean, and the chemical conditions necessary to support life. We have found complex organic molecules in multiple locations, mineral assemblages that on Earth are produced primarily by biology, seasonal methane whose origin remains unexplained, and an enormous reservoir of liquid water deep in the crust. We have not found definitive proof of life, past or present, but the circumstantial case has never been stronger, and the single most important piece of evidence, the Chiava Falls sample, is sitting in a sealed tube on the Martian surface waiting for someone to bring it home. The conspiracy theory that NASA or any other agency is hiding evidence of a Martian civilization has no basis in fact. What is hidden is not being concealed by any human institution. It is simply not yet known. Mars keeps its secrets buried in ancient mudstones, locked in subsurface ice, dissolved in deep crustal water, and drifting as trace gases in an atmosphere too thin to breathe. The instruments we have sent are sophisticated, but they are operating at the limits of their capabilities on a world the size of all Earth's continents combined. There are vast regions that have never been visited by a rover, never been drilled, never been sampled. The answer to whether Mars ever had life, or still has life, might be sitting a few feet below the surface at a location no mission has yet targeted. Or it might be in the tube labeled Sapphire Canyon, waiting in the Martian dust. The next decade will be decisive. If a Mars sample return mission, whether American, Chinese, or a collaboration of both, successfully delivers Perseverance's cached samples to Earth laboratories, the isotopic analysis, electron microscopy, and organic geochemistry that can be performed on those rocks will either confirm or rule out biological origin for the Chiava Falls minerals with a level of certainty that no rover instrument can match. If the Rosalind Franklin rover successfully drills into the Martian subsurface and finds preserved organic molecules or structures in rock that has been shielded from radiation for billions of years, it will open an entirely new window into Mars's biological potential. If future missions carry life detection instruments specifically designed to test for metabolism, DNA-like molecules or cellular structures, we may finally get the unambiguous answer that has eluded us for half a century. And if humans set foot on Mars within the next 2 decades, they will bring with them not only the tools of science, but the most powerful pattern recognition system ever evolved. The human brain, capable of noticing anomalies, asking unexpected questions, and making intuitive leaps that no robotic rover can replicate. Mars is not dead in the way that Mercury or the Moon are dead. It is not a body that was never alive. It is a world that had every ingredient for life, that may have nurtured life, and that may still shelter life in its deep, dark, watery interior. It is a world that died slowly over billions of years as its magnetic shield failed and its atmosphere bled into space. And it stands as the most vivid illustration in our solar system of what happens when a planet loses the conditions that make it habitable. Whether Mars is the corpse of a once living world, or merely a world that came heartbreakingly close to life and never quite got there, the answer matters. It matters because it tells us whether life is a cosmic inevitability, springing up wherever conditions allow, or a fluke, a one-time accident that happened on Earth and nowhere else. It matters because it informs our understanding of how long a planet can remain habitable before irreversible change tips it into sterility. And it matters because it is, at its core, the most human of all questions: are we alone? The red planet holds the answer. It is written in the chemistry of ancient mudstones, in the mineral grains of leopard-spotted rocks, in the seasonal pulse of methane rising from an unknown source beneath the frozen surface, in the vast dark ocean of water entombed miles below the rust-colored plains. We are closer to reading that answer than we have ever been. The greatest discovery in the history of science, or the most profound silence, awaits us on a world that glows like a drop of blood in the evening sky, 140 million miles from home.